This translator of the Quran into 13 world languages converted to Islam after 7 years of criticizing it. Imagine someone who has spent 7 years of his life just looking for mistakes in the Quran. Not 1 or 2 years, but 7 years full of research, criticism, and disbelief. A very long time to research a book that he considers a human product, not a divine revelation. But what happens when he finds that what he has been looking for all this time is not a deficiency, but an indescribable miracle? This is a true story that reveals how a human being can change from a critic to the most vocal defender of truth. The name of this person is Professor Dr. Samuel Edward Martin, a linguist and translator from Toronto, Canada. A linguist who has mastered more than 15 languages, including classical Arabic. He is not just an ordinary academic. For years, he worked as the head of religious text translation at an international institution called the Interfaith Translation Institute, ITI, which is headquartered in London, England. His main task is to translate the world's holy books into various languages, including the Quran. However, there is something very different in his approach to the Quran. As a skeptical scientist who has a very critical view of religion, especially Islam, Professor Dr. Samuel Martin does not see the Quran as a book full of wisdom and divine revelation. Instead, he sees it as a text full of inconsistencies, contradictions, and linguistic weaknesses. At first, Samuel Martin did not intend to study the Quran with good intentions. He believed that with his ability as a linguist, he could easily find weaknesses in the text. He thought that by translating the Quran, he could show the world that this book was not a revelation from God. Instead, he wanted to prove that the Quran is full of inconsistencies and contradictions that cannot be scientifically justified. In 2013, Samuel began this major project with full confidence. He began translating the Quran into 13 world languages: English, Spanish, French, German, Russian, Japanese, Chinese, Portuguese, Hindi, Swahili, Turkish, Italian, and Greek. He examined every verse, every word, and every sentence carefully. He was determined to find every mistake, every discrepancy that he could use to criticize the Quran. However, this journey turned out to be much more complex than he had imagined. In the middle of the translation process, he began to feel something was unusual. Although he tried hard to find weaknesses in the Quran, he felt a strange pattern, a consistency that was very difficult to explain with conventional logic. As written in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah verse 2, "This is the book, the Quran, about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those who are pious." This verse seemed to describe a reality very different from what he had expected. He was even more amazed when he realized that the text that he had thought was full of contradictions was actually very structured and had a depth that could not be explained by a linguistic approach alone. Not only that, the longer he translated, the more questions arose in his mind. How could a text that was more than 1,400 years old be so perfect in its language structure? How could a book revealed in an ancient Arabic context have such extraordinary depth and consistency, even though it was translated into very different modern languages? Internal consistency in the Quran is not something that can be taken lightly. In fact, in Surah Fussilat verse 42, Allah says, "Nothing can approach him except a book that has been read with full appreciation." This verse further emphasizes that the Quran is not an ordinary human work. As time went by, Dr. Samuel Martin began to feel confused by feelings that he could not explain. The Quran, which he considered full of imperfections, actually challenged his beliefs in unexpected ways. This is an intellectual journey that takes someone from disbelief to a deeper search for truth. Is this a coincidence? Or is it a path that has been outlined by Allah to open the eyes of a seeker of truth? The story of Professor Dr. Samuel Edward Martin is a story that shows that the search for truth is not always straight and easy. Sometimes, to find the light, one must first go through the darkness. And in that search, they will find not only answers, but also a profound transformation within themselves. Dr. Samuel said, "I am not anti-God. I just cannot accept the concept of a religion that claims to be a revelation, but claims to be full of contradictions. When I was first assigned to translate the Quran, I thought it would be easy. I will find the mistakes. I will prove that the Quran is not from God. That was my goal. Dr. Samuel Edward Martin, a leading scholar in the field of linguistics, has an extraordinary intellectual capacity. He is not only an expert in world languages, but also has a very deep expertise in classical Arabic. It was this expertise that made him chosen to lead the project to translate the Quran into 13 world languages. However, behind his prowess as a translator, Samuel had an unusual intention. He saw himself not as someone who wanted to spread the goodness of a holy book, but as a researcher who wanted to prove that the Quran was full of errors. The first task he undertook was to compile a linguistic analysis that criticized the Quran. Convinced that this text must be full of inconsistencies, he began to analyze every word and sentence carefully, digging into every corner to find contradictions that he could use to strengthen his argument. He was convinced that his research would show that the Quran was not divine revelation, but rather a product of human culture. Dr. Samuel said, "I remember reading the Quran for the first time with a closed mind. I tried hard to find errors, trying to connect verses that I thought did not fit together. I thought I would easily find many inconsistencies in the structure of the language, in the choice of words used. But what I found was different. With a spirit full of doubt, Dr. Samuel began translating the Quran into the languages he knew. His first task was to translate the book into English. This was no simple task. Every word in the Quran has a depth of meaning that cannot be explained by ordinary words alone. Samuel tried to use sophisticated linguistic techniques, language algorithms, and other scientific tools to solve what he considered a great puzzle. But the more he delved into each verse, the more he felt something was strange. "Doctor," Samuel said, "I began to notice something I had not expected before. Every verse I translated seemed to have a certain harmony. The structure of the language was very orderly, very precise, even more precise than other ancient texts I had translated." Dr. Samuel felt increasingly confused. As a scientist who is based on logic and scientific evidence, he felt that there was something that contradicted his rational understanding. For example, Surah Al-Baqarah verse 2 says, "This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those who are pious." This verse seemed to challenge him to find something wrong, but the deeper he examined it, the stronger his conviction that there was nothing wrong with the text. Dr. Samuel said, "I could not ignore what I saw. I felt like I was dealing with something bigger than just language. It was not just about words. There was something deeper." Although Samuel had initially intended to prove that the Quran was full of errors, it was at this point that he began to sense something that could not be explained by linguistics alone. The text that he had considered full of contradictions actually presented a consistency that could not be easily understood. He began to ask himself, "Do I really understand what I am studying?" Dr. Samuel said, "When I translated Surah Al-Ikhlas, I felt something different. How beautiful was the expression of the one God in these 4 short verses. How could such a simple text be so powerful and profound? I began to doubt my original intention." This is where the first point of his transformation occurred. When he translated Surah Al-Ikhlas, he discovered an unexpected depth in the message conveyed in just a few words. Surah Al-Ikhlas verse 1 reads, "Say, He is Allah the One." A simple statement, yet filled with extraordinary meaning. When he compared his translation with the original text, he could not help but notice how perfectly the sentence structure was, how the words seemed to convey such a powerful message with unimaginable precision. But even though he seemed to be starting to be moved, Samuel still had doubts. As he went further, he discovered something even more surprising. 2 years after starting his Quran translation project, Dr. Samuel began to feel an unexplained discomfort. At first, he believed he just needed to be more meticulous to find errors. However, the deeper he delved into the Quranic texts, the more he sensed a pattern that could not be understood by conventional means. Dr. Samuel said, "When I started breaking down the sentence structures in the Quran, there was something I couldn't explain. With the algorithms I created, I should have found structural inconsistencies in the text. I have studied many other ancient texts before, and they always had clear structural errors. But why does the Quran feel so perfectly structured? Known as a leading linguist, Dr. Samuel grew increasingly puzzled. In his research, he applied modern linguistic methods he usually used on various ancient texts, but the results were not as expected. The more he analyzed, the more he felt there was a strange pattern impossible to explain by human logic alone. The texts he expected to reveal inconsistencies instead showed extraordinary consistency. Each verse seemed deeply interconnected in a way he could not decipher with his tools. The language structure used in the Quran was not only integrated with meaning but also harmonized with rhythm and cadence that was hard to explain. Dr. Samuel said, "I began to wonder, am I wrong? Why is every verse I translate so perfect? I tried various language algorithms, breaking down sentence by sentence, but the results remained the same. Extraordinary consistency. I even tried to find grammatical inconsistencies, but could not find any." One moment that deepened his confusion was when he analyzed Surah Fussilat verse 42, which says, "Nothing can rival his words, and he is the Almighty, the All-Wise." This verse seemed to confirm all his doubts, that the Quran was not just an ordinary text but a revelation with depths that could not be explained by linguistics or any language analysis methods. Dr. Samuel said, "I even broke down these sentences using mathematical approaches. I wanted to find something inconsistent in these verses. But when I did, I found something more surprising: no mistakes at all. I felt like I was trying to break something very strong, yet I couldn't." Samuel began to realize that what he considered errors and inconsistencies were not simple matters. The Quran seemed to have a structure and pattern so perfect, something beyond his understanding. Every translation he made, every analysis he conducted, showed only one thing: the Quran is not an ordinary text but a work far deeper than he had imagined. As time passed, Dr. Samuel felt increasingly trapped in his confusion. In his effort to prove the Quran was full of errors, he instead became immersed in the beauty and harmony of the text. Dr. Samuel said, "I feel like I am at the edge of an intellectual abyss. Every time I try to see the Quran as an ordinary text, I become more fascinated by its complexity and depth. There is a harmony in the language that cannot be explained by ordinary scientific methods." This confusion continued to haunt Samuel. In his search to find inconsistencies in the Quran, he instead found strength and consistency that made him doubt his own views. He began to wonder if there was something greater behind this text, something that could not be explained by human knowledge alone. Dr. Samuel said, "I started asking myself, could I be wrong? Maybe I don't fully understand what I am studying. Sometimes when I look at the Quran, I feel like I am seeing a bigger pattern, a system more perfect than I could imagine." At this point, Samuel felt very confused. He was at a crossroads. On one side, he wanted to maintain his belief that the Quran was a human-made text, but on the other, he could not deny the consistency and depth that became increasingly clear. The more he tried to dismantle his argument, the more he was drawn to the mystery contained in the text. Dr. Samuel said, "I even started talking to several Muslim scholars to understand more deeply. I attended online tafsir classes, spoke with intellectuals worldwide. But the more I heard, the more I felt there was something beyond just the text I held. There was a depth that could not be explained." In the 4th year of his research, a turning point came. Samuel began to open his heart to consider broader views. He started asking himself whether he had been too hasty in drawing conclusions all this time. His question was no longer just about language structure, but about a much deeper meaning. If you need the translation in a different style or further summarized, please let me know. In the 4th year of his research, a significant turning point occurred in Dr. Samuel's intellectual journey. He felt trapped in his confusion. What he initially considered errors in the Quran now raised many questions. He felt he could no longer continue his search without facing increasingly difficult realities. As everything became more perplexing, Samuel decided to seek answers in a more open way. Dr. Samuel said, "I began to think, maybe I don't fully understand this text. I have tried in many ways, but I still feel something is missing. Perhaps I need to delve deeper, to talk with people who truly understand the Quran. Dr. Samuel, who already had extensive knowledge of language, now felt the need to broaden his intellectual horizons. He began seeking scholars and Muslim intellectuals who could help him understand the Quran from a deeper perspective. He even took tafsir, Quranic exegesis, classes anonymously, aiming to learn more about Quranic interpretation without being influenced by others' views. However, the deeper he studied, the more he felt his search led him to understandings different from what he had expected. One night, he contacted a sheikh from Egypt, widely respected among Muslim scholars. That conversation opened many doors for Dr. Samuel, which had previously been tightly locked by his doubts. Dr. Samuel said, "When I spoke with the sheikh from Egypt, I was very surprised. He was neither angry nor offended when I challenged verses I thought were contradictory. Instead of arguing harshly, he simply said, 'If you are sure this is man-made, then create one surah comparable to it.'" The narrator continued, "The sheikh's words struck his mind deeply. He never imagined that the intellectual debate he expected would end with such a great challenge. Rather than replying with arguments, the sheikh challenged him to prove his own claim. It was as if, instead of seeking faults in the Quran, Samuel was confronted with the reality that no one could match the beauty and perfection of the text. Dr. Samuel said, "I felt struck by that challenge. No one can answer it. I even began to question myself. If I am so sure this is man-made, why can't I make even one surah comparable to it?" That challenge made Samuel reflect deeply. Previously, he always believed the Quran was just an ancient text full of inconsistencies. But now, he began to see that those claims might not be entirely true. The more he pondered the sheikh's challenge, the more he realized that the Quran is not a text to be taken lightly. In his ongoing search, Dr. Samuel began to open himself to new perspectives. He started deepening his study of tafsir and spent more time reading interpretations by scholars on verses he had previously considered controversial. He began studying classical and modern tafsir that revealed depths of meaning he had long ignored. Dr. Samuel said, "The more tafsir I read, the more I feel trapped in a greater understanding. Verses I thought were contradictory actually open new insights into wisdom I had not previously understood." Long nights for Dr. Samuel are now filled with tafsir exploration and deep discussions with Muslim scholars from around the world. From online tafsir classes to private meetings, he increasingly delves into the meanings contained in the Quran. He began to realize that tafsir is not merely a linguistic explanation, but also a path to understanding the spiritual depth and wisdom within God's revelation. The challenge posed by the sheikh from Egypt continued to echo in his mind. How could he possibly match the beauty and depth of the Quran if he could not comprehend the entire essence of the text? At the same time, he felt a strange sensation, a sense of silence and peace he had never felt before, even though he still struggled to maintain his doubts. Dr. Samuel said, "I feel like I am losing the arguments I once considered strong. Every time I read, I feel as if something is filling a void in my heart, something I cannot explain with words." Dr. Samuel, who had focused on proving the Quran was full of errors, now felt that his search had brought him to a very different understanding. He began to realize that, although he had considered himself superior with his linguistic knowledge, the Quran was showing him something deeper than what he could grasp with knowledge alone. The 6th year marked the peak of the restlessness that had continuously haunted Dr. Samuel. After months of grappling with doubt and searching for answers, he began to feel as if there was something far greater than the intellectual analysis he had been conducting. His thoughts and research became increasingly confusing, and although he continued to investigate deeper, there was a strange feeling that kept arising, a feeling he could not grasp through logic alone. However, there was one event he could never forget. On a dark and quiet night, amid the growing inner struggle, Dr. Samuel experienced a dream that deeply moved his heart and changed his entire perspective. Dr. Samuel said, "At that moment, I woke up feeling very distressed. I went to sleep with a mind full of confusion, but suddenly I fell into a very vivid dream. In that dream, I was in the middle of a hot desert, my body very tired and thirsty. felt like I could barely survive. Then, a man approached and recited a verse with a gentle yet profoundly meaningful voice. Instantly, my body felt refreshed, my thirst disappeared, and I felt an extraordinary peace. The dream was so vivid and profound that it made Dr. Samuel awaken with tears flowing. He could not hold back the overwhelming emotions inside him. The verse recited by the figure in his dream was very clear in his memory. Even more astonishing, it was a verse he had never translated before. Dr. Samuel said, "When I woke up, I felt as if something had just changed inside me. I immediately remembered the verse recited in that dream. Surah Ar-Raid, verse 28. Verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. I felt as though that verse penetrated my soul and gave answers to all the doubts I had harbored." That verse, part of Surah Ar-Raid, speaks about the tranquility of the heart that can only be found through dhikrullah, the remembrance of Allah. Although Dr. Samuel had never translated this verse before, he felt the dream was no coincidence. It felt as if Allah himself was directly conveying a message to him. The peace he felt was so extraordinary, as if the entire universe had fallen silent, and he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Dr. Samuel said, "I cannot explain my feelings. My heart is calm, like something that was lost has now returned. I have just discovered something far greater than mere intellect. I feel as though Allah spoke directly to me in that dream." That dream became an inevitable turning point in Dr. Samuel's spiritual journey. After years of trying to criticize and analyze the Quran, the dream gave him something beyond academic answers. He felt as if he had been reunited with the peace he had long sought but never found in the scientific world. As he reflected more deeply, he realized that the peace he felt was a gift far greater than anything he could achieve through research alone. Dr. Samuel said, "I woke from that sleep with a heart full of confusion. No words can describe what I felt. But one thing is certain, the feeling was very real. And I know I cannot just ignore it." Dr. Samuel could not ignore the feeling that overwhelmed him. He realized that although his research had been full of doubts and a search for errors in the Quran, this dream opened his eyes to something far greater. Something that cannot be explained with words or logic alone, but only with a heart connected to God. Meanwhile, the peace he felt grew deeper. He felt as if he had been found again by something that had long been lost. This was not merely intellectual understanding, but a peace that enveloped his soul. That dream, with all its miracles, became a beacon in his long journey to find the ultimate truth. Dr. Samuel said, "Since that dream, I can no longer see the Quran the same way. I feel called to see it with my heart, not just with my eyes. I want to understand more about what I feel and why that feeling is so strong." Now, that dream serves as a reminder that constantly echoes in Dr. Samuel's mind. Perhaps he had been too focused on intellectual analysis and logic alone, but now he knows that true peace can only be found by opening the heart and contemplating deeper meanings. After that stirring dream, Dr. Samuel felt that his path toward a greater truth became clearer. He realized that his intellectual journey could no longer answer the inner questions that continued to haunt him. As a scientist, he had lived a life full of analysis and logic, but at this point, he began to sense that there was another dimension that could not be explained by words or scientific formulas. He felt a deeper calling, a call to understand more about the Quran, and perhaps also to accept the truth he had long avoided. On November 18, 2020, at a small gathering in London, Dr. Samuel made a decision that shocked the academic world. He declared the Sharia, Islamic testimony of faith, before the Muslim community present, a decision that not only changed his life but also the world of translation. Many found it hard to believe this great step, but for Dr. Samuel, the Sharia was the pinnacle of a long spiritual journey. Dr. Samuel said, "I can no longer deny it. After 7 years of trying to find faults, what I found instead was a truth that cannot be hidden. I tried every way to prove that the Quran was flawed, but I found unimaginable depth instead, like a light illuminating the darkness within me." I can no longer pretend. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. The Shahada pronounced by Dr. Samuel resonated not only within himself but also throughout the translation world. As a linguist who had long worked translating the Quran with the intent to prove its faults, his decision to embrace Islam surprised many, including his colleagues. Some doubted his decision, unable to understand how a scientist with an international reputation could so drastically change his views. However, for Dr. Samuel, the Shahada was a decision long contemplated with a heart full of conviction. He did not merely accept Islam intellectually but also spiritually, with a deeper understanding and inner experience that could not be expressed in words. Dr. Samuel said, "I feel as though I have found something greater than mere knowledge. Within me, I feel the peace I have long sought. The Quran is not just a text, but a path to a deeper understanding of God and life." The decision to embrace Islam did not come without challenges. Many friends, colleagues, and associates were confused and even disappointed. Those who had known Dr. Samuel for years as a harsh critic of Islam could not comprehend the drastic change in him. Yet, Dr. Samuel was not swayed by such criticism. He knew this decision was a call from within, and he felt more peaceful than ever before. The Shahada he uttered was not just words, but a full confession that changed his life. At that moment, Dr. Samuel knew he was on the right path, even though it was not an easy one. Dr. Samuel said, "This decision comes from the heart, not just logic. I feel as if I was guided to do this, even though many do not understand why I changed. But for me, this is the true truth. Nothing is more beautiful than complete surrender to God." With this great decision, Dr. Samuel did not only become a Muslim but also a bearer of Dawah, Islamic propagation. He did not stop at the Shahada but continued to study Islam diligently, delving deeper into its teachings and striving to spread the messages of Islam that he understood to the world. He felt that his spiritual journey had just begun, and now he saw the world through a different lens, a lens filled with peace, wisdom, and deeper understanding of life's meaning. Dr. Samuel said, "I know this is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey. I want to share what I have found, to share the peace and truth I feel. The Quran is not just a book I translate. Now I understand it as a source of life that teaches us to live better, with peace and understanding." This extraordinary transformation not only impacted Dr. Samuel's personal life, but also many who knew him. He became a living example that the search for truth does not always go as we imagine. And sometimes the answers we seek come from the most unexpected places. A scientist who initially criticized has now become one of the most vocal defenders of the Quran.